What's the latest that's going on in Syria if we move there?
Actually, we keep on the theme of British interference abroad and talking about the unelected alleged president of Syria, Jolani, now known as Ahmed al-Shara. Of course, we can say that his grooming began in Camp Bucca, one of the CIA black sites in Iraq, after which he joined ISIS, and he then formed Al-Qaeda or Nusra Front in Syria, which was rebranded then as HTS, but is still adhering to the ideology of Al-Qaeda. So let's go back to 2021, and this was a PBS Frontline documentary called The Jihadist, which set the wheels in motion for the grooming of Jolani as political opposition.
He waged jihad in Iraq and Syria, accused of terror and torture.
You're a wanted man. There's a $10 million price tag on your head.
A former al-Qaeda commander says he's changed. Speaking to a Western reporter for the first time.
How is it that somebody is going to want to trust you?
Now on Frontline, correspondent Martin Smith investigates the jihadist.
And so now let's fast forward to 2025, May the 1st, and the former US ambassador to Syria from 2011 to 2014, who spoke before the Baltimore Council on Foreign Affairs. So let's have a listen to what he had to say.
So, starting in 2023, a British non-government organization which specializes in conflict resolution invited me to help them bring this guy out of the terrorist world and into regular politics. And at first, I have to tell you, I was very leery of going. I sort of had images of me in an orange jumpsuit with a knife to my throat. He never apologized for the terrorist attacks in Iraq or in Syria, although there were many fewer in Syria. Never apologized.
And just a very quick reminder with this image taken from an article that I wrote back in, I think, 2017. Here is Ambassador Ford in Syria with the Free Syrian Army, the alleged moderates, Colonel Okaidi in 2013. And on the right is the same colonel with a leader of ISIS, part of Omar the Chechen's group of fighters who led many of the attacks against the Syrian Arab army. Ford, in fact, was unceremoniously flung out of Syria when it became very apparent that he was there to incite the uprising against the then Syrian government. And I just want to have a look at another section from his talk in Baltimore. So let's have a look at this quick video.
None. I went to Syria in January. I met Ahmed Shara, the president then. When I saw him in the presidential palace, I said, never in a million years did I expect to see you here. And he kind of grinned and he said, well, I like to keep surprising you, Mr. Ambassador. He has a sense of humor. I don't normally think of Al-Qaeda as having a sense of humor, but anyway. So,
Now, what I found quite interesting there is that he did say Al-Qaeda he didn't consider had a sense of humor, so he still obviously considers Jolani to be Al-Qaeda. So let's have a look. There were a number of articles outlining Robert Ford's visit to Syria, and this is just one of them, My Syria Visit, Rays of Hope and Fears for the Future. But he also mentions in the article this section, which if we can just have a look at the quote, I was delighted to accept an invitation from a British NGO to join them in a visit to a free Syria in the middle of January. So clearly he mentions back in 2023 that it was a British unnamed NGO that organized his talks with Jolani, and then he went with them in January of this year to Damascus. And then I just want to bring up the visit of the military attaché, Lieutenant Colonel Smith, that Brian mentioned on Monday. This was the visit to Damascus of the Lieutenant Colonel Charles Smith, military attaché, and where he met with the defense minister, alleged defense minister, Mahaf Abu Kasra. And just a reminder, of course, that Mahaf Abu Kasra, his roots lie in Al-Qaeda. He was an Al-Qaeda commander before he became a suited and booted member of the Al-Qaeda government that has been put into power in Syria by an international coup. And then I just want to focus a little bit on this Lieutenant Colonel Charles Smith. In November of 2024, he was in Lebanon with a military attaché group, if we can just bring that up. UK Defence Senior Advisor reaffirms Lebanese armed forces as the sole legitimate defender of Lebanon. So bear in mind, this was just before the ceasefire between Hezbollah and Israel, which then precipitated us into the international coup that toppled the Syrian government. So very interesting timing. And Charles actually pointed out to me yesterday that there was a government report on a later visit to Damascus by Lieutenant Colonel Charles Smith, to Lebanon, in March of this year also. So he's obviously very active between Lebanon and Syria. And let's have a look at what was said in that meeting. This isn't actually what he said, but it's what was reported from the meeting. The meeting addressed opportunities for technical and military cooperation and mechanisms for developing the army structure to meet modern challenges. So British military getting involved in the so-called development of Syria post-coup, which, of course, the British were very much involved in. It was published in very few outlets, mostly Lebanese, Syrian, and this in the Jerusalem Post. So Israeli media, the source who works in the ministry's public relations department, added that the British visit may serve as a prelude to normalization with the current Syrian government. I would certainly agree with that. And then a reminder that a couple of weeks ago, we talked about the fact that there are British private military mercenaries basically on the ground inside Syria, and that the Syrian director of the Emerald Group was actually appointed again in November 2024. So at the same time as Lieutenant Colonel Charles Smith was conducting meetings with his colleagues in Lebanon. So interesting timing. I mean, that's pure speculation. I obviously don't have anything to tie them together except the timing itself. So let's have a quick look at a summary of what I've been talking about. So in 2021, we had the PBS interview with Jolani, the jihadist, where they definitely sort of trimmed his beard and put him in a suit and tried to legitimize him as political opposition. In 2023, a British NGO, unnamed, and Robert Ford visited Jolani to, again, continue the grooming project in March and September. 2024, November, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Smith in Lebanon, just prior to the ceasefire that led to, between Israel and Hezbollah, that then was led to the coup in Syria. 2024 again, Emerald PMC, Syria director, was appointed at the same time that Charles Smith was in Lebanon. 2025, January visit by Robert Ford, and again, this unnamed British NGO. And in 2025, again, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Smith visits Damascus with a view to securing a British military footprint alongside Al-Qaeda.
Thank you for that, Vanessa. We'll more Foreign Office-related news later on. So thank you for that. Now, Sandy, let me welcome you to the programme.